My name is John Meeser. I chair the Economic Development Task Force of the Magiel Walker Initiative addressing poverty. Thank you for coming today. We really have a good group of people. We have folks here from City Hall. That, of course, would include the mayor, mayor's staff, members of City Council. We have some other elected officials. Oh, you cannot hear. Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. Well, I used to teach a class of 150, so I probably could even do without the microphone, but I will use it anyway. And we also have several foundations represented here, and then a lot of nonprofit organizations, universities, both VCU and the University of Richmond are here. So thank you very much. I want to keep my comments very brief. We're here to, first of all, hear from the mayor, and then we are here to learn a lot from Ted Howard from Cleveland. None of us would be here today talking about this subject had it not been for Mayor Jones putting together, as far as we know, the first anti-poverty commission that any city in the United States has ever developed. When we were talking about this, we were curious whether other cities were developing such an initiative, and we did not know of another city that had developed this kind of an anti-poverty initiative. Mayor Jones, we're very grateful for your leadership. And also we have leadership of Councilwoman Ellen Robertson, who was one of the prime movers working with Mayor Jones, and Dr. Thad Williamson, who from the University of Richmond has been working closely with Councilwoman Robertson and Mayor Jones. And I want to thank you, Thad, and Ellen for your marvelous leadership. And that's all I'm going to say. Welcome, and it is my great privilege to introduce the mayor of the city of Richmond, Dwight Jones.
Well, thank you, Dr. Meeser, and to all of you who are here. It's a delight to be here, and it is true that we're just getting back from Florence, Italy, where we saw the cycling championships taking place there. We went to make sure that they did it right so we could do it better. So we're looking forward to 2015, and it certainly was an exciting time in Florence, and we know that it's going to be an exciting time here in Richmond in 2015. I want to recognize the President of City Council, Charles Samuels, Parker Angelesto from the 5th District, and Ellen Robertson from the 9th District. Let's give them a hand. It's hard to be a city councilman in the city of Richmond. And this is a very near and dear project to my heart, and I'm delighted to be with you today to talk a little bit about what has happened in our efforts to, and John Belies. He's trying to hide. You can't hide from me, buddy, I tell you. Are there any others that are here before I go forward? Okay. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, and something that I determined would be a goal for my years in office here as mayor of Richmond. And as Dr. Meeser has said, in January of this year, we had the report of our Anti-Poverty Commission. And the report was centered around several recommendations, expanding the workforce development initiatives, targeting economic development strategies. And one of the big ones is regional transportation and improving educational outcomes, and of course, the dilution of housing patterns that are concentrated with poverty. And you know, we have so many reports that we receive and so many recommendations, but they don't mean much if they're just sitting on the shelf or just things that make us feel good. And so as Dr. Meisner said, Ellen Robertson and Thad Williamson have been the co-chairs of this initiative, have helped us move towards an implementation strategy. And that's what this is about, implementation. We want to make sure that the recommendations are not just accolades or thoughts that might be nice, but we really want to make a difference in the city of Richmond. And so they have divided the work into 7 policy task force, and we're going to determine what needs to be done, how long it's going to take, how we're going to measure success, how much it's going to cost, and I guess the big one is who's going to pay for it. The important thing as I go around the city and talk about our desire to mitigate poverty is that many people don't recognize, who live in the city, the degree of the problems that we face as it relates to poverty. Most people don't know that 90% of people working age residents who live in poverty work part-time jobs or don't work at all. Many people don't know that in the recent census, 2/3 of the adults living in poverty have less than a high school diploma. They do not have the capacity, nor do they have the wherewithal to get a job that would help them pull themselves out of poverty. I would dare say many people have never been across the Martin Luther King Bridge to take advantage of seeing the divide that we have in our city. And so these task forces have been charged with several tasks, workforce development, economic development task forces, charged with increasing the capacity to move people into living wage jobs. That's very important, living wage jobs, and to capitalize on existing economic development initiatives and to create jobs appropriate for workers with high school diplomas. It's a very important initiative that we want for them to accomplish. Also, we want to develop social enterprise business models. We want to create viable neighborhood-based firms that will hire persons in our community at living wage jobs. We want to pave the way for that to happen in the city. And so this is a bold initiative. This is not something for the faint of heart. Yet I believe that we can accomplish it. I believe that we will accomplish it. And it is important for us to be proud of what we have done, but not to be satisfied until we have accomplished the goals that are before us. We must also investigate best available evidences from models that work, and for that reason we are here today. And so I'm pleased to welcome Ted Howard to the city of Richmond today, and to have him tell us a little bit about the wonderful Evergreen Cooperative Fund. And as I read about it, I understood that it is a collaborative model that includes the philanthropic community, also takes advantage of resources that perhaps we have not taken full advantage of in the past. But most importantly, it's a collaborative model that requires us to understand that this idea of mitigating poverty is going to take all of us. And so we have to take off our city council hats and our school board hats and our housing development hats and our university hats and come around the table together to make sure that this happens. When people ask me, why do you want to be mayor? And sometimes people say, you know, I would never have your job. And I said, that makes me feel good to know that you would never have my job, and I appreciate the sympathy. But the truth of the matter is that if we cannot do this, there's no need for us to be here. If we cannot do this, there's no need for me to be here. And for me, this is paramount in changing the paradigm of the quality of life and living for not just some of the residents of the city of Richmond, but for all of the residents of the city of Richmond. And when we look back on this work, we will be able to say that in addition to the skyscrapers, in addition to the buildings, in addition to the developments, we've been able to give a better quality of life to the people who live in the city. And I think that's how we'll be judged. And for that reason, I'm very happy today to welcome Ted Howard, and he's taller than he looks in his pictures. So we're delighted to have you, Ted. Won't you come to the podium?
Thank you, and thank you very much, Mayor Jones, and all the members of the City Council who are here, thank you very much for making time. I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday. I flew in from Cleveland, drove down here, driving back. Tonight I was supposed to be with my colleague Steve Dove, our research director. We're supposed to be leading a 2-hour webinar at HUD tomorrow on these topics. That's not happening. So I'm delighted to be in a city that's open for business, an actual government that works. So congratulations on that. The mayor, one of the things I appreciate about your remarks is your assertion that really it's going to take all of us to resolve these problems. And I want to begin there because it really does. You know, the former First Lady, Hillary Clinton, as you may recall, wrote a book some time ago called It Takes a Village to Educate a Child, in that sense of it's not just one person's responsibility, it's all of ours. And to move the needle on intractable social problems that have been persistent so long, like generational poverty, it really does take all of us. And the work I'll describe to you in Cleveland is really, we call it a multi-stakeholder collaborative. It involves the residents of very disinvested low-income neighborhoods, because without their participation, this would never work. It requires the city government. Our mayor, Frank Jackson, has been heroic in his support of a new approach to economic development that is a bit outside the box. It's not what most cities are doing, and yet he was willing to take that chance and help us in all kinds of ways that I'll describe. It takes local philanthropy, which has really stepped up to the plate and said, you know, we've been funding community development and economic development for an awfully long time, but there's actually more poor people than before we began this work. So something we're doing isn't working. We need to innovate and try something new. Takes the local business community. I'm going to describe this evergreen project, and we have a board of directors that governs this whole thing. And one of the members of the board of directors is the CEO and the president of the Cleveland Indians baseball team. He's concerned enough about the community that he wants to participate. By the way, the Indians are in the playoffs for the first time in a long time. And so it really takes all of us working together. And that's what I'll describe. Now, I'd like, before talking about Cleveland, and by the way, I was thrilled to hear that the mayor has roots in Cleveland. Wherever I go, there seem to be people from Cleveland. It's kind of like the Irish diaspora. There's Ohioans everywhere. And I always invite them to come back and bring their money and stay. But what I'd like to do is start with a couple national statistics, because I know this is an initiative around poverty in Richmond. But the kind of problems we have in Richmond are just representative of the bigger problem that we have in the country. Then I want to describe a couple models that are trying to deal with this in places other than Cleveland, and then take you through what we're attempting to do in Cleveland through what's called the Evergreen Cooperative Initiative and also the Greater University Circle Initiative. So I'll be describing those to you. So first of all, and I intend to leave plenty of room for us to discuss and dialogue. So first of all, I want to describe three kinds of statistics to you. One is about poverty in the United States. Every fall, the U.S. Census Bureau reports poverty statistics. They've been doing it for over 50 years. This fall, the number is standing of Americans living below the poverty line, about 48 million of us nationally, in a country of 330 million or so. 48 million, about 16%, and that's been going up in recent years. 1 in every 5 children in the richest, most successful economy in the history of the world, 1 in every 5 children lives below the poverty line. And some of you may know, who dwell in these figures, that America calculates its poverty line in a very different way than most advanced countries like our own. These are calculations that were developed under President Johnson's administration long ago in the 60s. If you take the way most countries like ours, countries in Europe, for instance, would calculate their poverty line, you would take the median income of the country, and then you would take half of the median, and say those living below half of the median live in the below the poverty line. So if we did that in the United States, the number of Americans living below the poverty line would be about 75 million if we use that kind of calculation. So surely this is an extraordinary problem we're facing. Unemployment is also, we hear that the national statistic is, I guess we're down to below 8% now. We're starting to recover from the Great Recession. However, the true unemployment level, and again, the mayor really alluded to this, if you look at Americans who are, who've dropped out of looking for work, who can't find work, or who can only find part-time work, then you're talking about 27 million of us unemployed. 60% of the jobs that were lost during the Great Recession of a few years ago were high-wage jobs. Now we're getting jobs coming back, and 60% of them are low-wage jobs. I do some work in Amarillo, Texas. It's in the panhandle of Texas, a community about the same size. You're from Amarillo? Okay, Amy. So not only does Amy have the same last name, we're clear we're cousins, or maybe, well, you can't be my long-lost sister because I'm like 30-some years older than you, but from Amarillo. So in Amarillo, they're very proud when you go to Amarillo, as they should be, that they'll report to you when you all had unemployment of 11% nationally, our unemployment rate never got above 4.5%. And indeed now it's below 4%. That's extraordinary. That used to be called full employment in the United States. But if you go, as I did, into the Amarillo Independent School District and meet with the supervisor, what you learn of all the kids in the Amarillo public school system, 64% are on everyday federally subsidized food programs. That means everybody in Amarillo is working, essentially, and the parents of 64% of the kids in the school system aren't making enough to be able to send their kids to school with lunch. That's another part of the dynamic that we're facing. And then finally, and Carla's going to do the slides, so you'll hear me say, okay, Carla. Wealth inequality is an extraordinary issue that we're facing right now. And we've all heard about the 1% and all that. And I'm not here to, castigate people and call people out and do all that. But here's the fact. 400 individuals in the United States, 400 people like us, we could assemble them in a big conference room here in the city, own more wealth than the bottom 185 million Americans. So this isn't about income inequality, which is another issue, but wealth inequality. And wealth is, of course, what you have that you can invest to create more wealth and assets for yourself. I work with a very eminent political economist who used this statistic and said this is very nearly the same as the situation in feudal Europe in the Middle Ages. When there was no democracy, there was a king and a church and a bunch of serfs, and you had this kind of concentration. And another eminent British historian came up to him after one of these presentations and said, well, Professor, I'd like to beg to differ with this. I'm a scholar of medieval England, and wealth inequality was never this bad in medieval England. So it's a very serious situation we face. So how do we address this, Carla? So a lot of what we do to try to address these problems of wealth inequality and poverty, concentrated poverty, joblessness, particularly in core city areas, is economic development as traditionally practiced. And for myself, I think while there's an enormous amount of terrific work that goes on in the field and really heroic work, people have really, worked, some of them, their whole careers trying to advance things in a good direction. There are severe limitations to this paradigm or this model of economic development. And I won't go through all these, but $80 billion a year is spent by cities and states, basically doing what used to be called smokestack chasing. If you're in a city like Milwaukee, and you're in the economic development department, and if you can entice a company from Cleveland to leave Cleveland, 200 people in Cleveland will lose their jobs, bring their company to Milwaukee, and we'll give you subsidies and tax breaks and clean up the land and give you the land and all that, and you bring the jobs there, that's considered a victory in urban economic development. Except 200 people in Cleveland lost their jobs. Now there are 200 people employed in Milwaukee. These subsidies will last for about 6 years. And then what's going to happen is North Carolina, or maybe you all, are going to give them a better deal, and then they're going to leave Milwaukee and come down here. And that's sort of swapping out $80 billion a year is being spent on that. Workforce development, I was delighted to hear about some innovations in workforce development here. Around the country, it's a huge industry of about $37 billion at all levels, nonprofit, federal, state, city, $37 billion, but far too often, the workforce training is not linked to an actual job at the end of the pipeline. I'm going to tell you about a different model that's happening in Cleveland and hopefully is coming here to Richmond soon. So we would hire people in our evergreen businesses in Cleveland that had gone through training programs, 3 or 4 or 5 training programs, and never got a job as a result. So we need to link that. We need to do something different there. A lot of urban areas are focused on big regional economic development strategies, and that often leads to a lot of jobs and businesses in the suburbs, but very rarely does that trickle down into the core urban area. It just doesn't affect people, the people that are reported on in this poverty study. There are lots of other areas I won't go into, but one of them is that so many ex-offenders in our country, or what some people call returning citizens, are excluded from work. And we've got to find a way to deal with that. And so what's another approach, Carla? So we call this community wealth building. And it's a new strategy for economic development that we're trying to implement in Cleveland, and indeed there are wealth building initiatives now in a number of other cities that are starting as a result, inspired by Cleveland. So first, it emphasizes broadening ownership over wealth. It focuses very much on place and the local economy and revitalizing the local place. It promotes broader ownership over business. It says if it's good for individuals to own business, why can't more people get into that game? And I'll show you different mechanisms for doing that. It's very concerned about the question of how do you anchor jobs locally. Cleveland in the 1950s used to have more Fortune 500 corporations headquartered there than any city in America except for New York City. Cleveland, Ohio. Today there are 2 or 3 left. They've all left. They've all gone. So how do you anchor and root jobs so that they can be counted on for years and years to come? It's very interested in how do you support individual and family wealth building and asset accumulation. And it's interested in this concept of the multiplier effect. How do you stop money from leaking out of your community? We were talking here about a bicycle program here and manufacturing bicycle stands. Now, one way to get those bicycle stands is you can buy them from Connecticut, right? And you buy them and they'll come here, except all your money leaves. Or another way is produce them here locally. You're paying wages. Those people with wages go to the grocery store. They're using money, and you get a multiplier effect. So stopping money from leaking out of the area, substituting imports. I think we'll go next. So this, I'm not going to go through all this, but this is, and anyone who would like this PowerPoint, you're quite happy to give it to you. These are different well, you haven't seen the whole thing. You could get, they're really dodgy there toward the end. These are all mechanisms, institutional structures, types of corporate systems, structures that are built on those kinds of principles of community wealth building that I just suggested. And they go from the most individually focused, a hospital that says, okay, for every child born in this hospital, we will give that child at birth a baby bond of $200. And then it'll be invested, and that child can have access to it when he or she turns 18 or 21. So that's an asset that accumulates over time. And there are programs like that that have been done. But then it moves toward broader types of ownership. In the third column, second from the right, you see there are cooperatives, which is a mechanism we're using in Cleveland, where the people who work in the company actually own a piece of that company, so it's internally owned. There are employee stock ownership plans. I'm sure you've got them here in Richmond. They're all over the country. There are now over 10,000 ESOP firms. Again, some 100% owned by the people working in the company, some a different percentage, but it's a way to, again, organize a company for greater benefit for the people working within it. There's a lot of social enterprise, nonprofits starting for-profit businesses that return resources to the mission. There are all kinds of very interesting mechanisms that exist. And one of the things that's heartening to me, even in some of these dark times, is if we could transport ourselves in, you know, the Wayback Machine, for those of you my age, you'll recognize that cartoon, Rocky and Bullwinkle. If we went back like 40 years, virtually none of this would be on this screen. These are innovations that have been developed over the last 4 decades. So there's a whole new type of economy being born in the United States based on different principles than the way a lot of structures are organized. Next. So I want to give you 4 examples of actual real-life businesses that exist right now that express these principles, and then I'll turn to Evergreen. So out in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's a network of green home cleaning companies called Wages, Women's Action to Gain Economic Security. It's a network now of 5, I think the 6th one's just coming online. It employs about 100 members now. It will soon be about 120 members. If you've ever hired, we have in Washington, D.C., where I used to live, there's a company called Maid Brigade. I don't know if you have that, but it's a company where you say, I need my house cleaned, and will you send someone over? And you pay, you know, maybe $15 an hour to that company, but the woman who actually does the housekeeping is only getting minimum wage. And this industry is just notorious. There are no health benefits. It's just, you know, very difficult. But in San Francisco, these women, most of whom are immigrants, newcomers to the country, banded together, created this network of employee-owned businesses. They're the employees. They make wages of $15, which are far above the industry standard. They have health care. They have leadership development and training. And they said, you know, we're tired of using these chemicals. They're making us sick when we're cleaning people's homes. So part of their branding is they use environmentally friendly techniques and materials. So that's one company. It's been around for quite some time, well over a decade, quite successful. Next. New Community Corporation. This is a community development corporation. I know you have many here in Richmond. Most CDCs in America, and there are about 5,000, really tend to concentrate on housing and low-income housing. This model is different. It really decided we wanted to be about employment, job creation, and business development. And so right now, this began a long time ago. You know, doing this takes time, over time. But New Community Corporation employs now 1,300 people in Newark. At one point, I think, this is Newark, New Jersey, I think it was the 2nd largest employer in the city after the city government. It has a shopping center, all kinds of different businesses it owns, hiring people in the community. As they're profitable, revenues come back to the CDC to be used in its social programs and so forth. So 1,300 people working in this type of enterprise. Next. And the assets, as you saw, exceeded over $500 million. It's a substantial effort. Market Creek Plaza is a very interesting effort in San Diego in California, where there's a very low-income neighborhood, had no amenities at all. A local foundation stepped in and began a redevelopment effort with lots of consultation from the local residents. Now it's a very lovely facility. It's got arts and culture and shopping and restaurants and all kinds of things. But the interesting thing is the foundation said, you know, if this is really going to be for the community, we need to turn over some ownership to the community of this effort. It shouldn't just be our project. The community should own it also, because as they do, they'll benefit even more. And they started, in a sense, a quasi-IPO offering and sold shares, not very expensive, to local residents. Today, over 400 residents own $500,000 of this effort. They bought their shares. That's 20% of the equity, and it's going to increase to 50%. So imagine a local business owned by people, and I saw a really interesting video about this, where a woman who was obviously a resident of the neighborhood, she probably was living in a very low or moderate income household situation. She said this really profound thing. She said, I never thought a person like me could own a piece of something like this. That's really extraordinary, because I'm sure anyone in this room, if we wanted to go out and own a business or start a business, we could figure out how to do that, and we'd have, you know, the right credit history and the access to money, and we could put that together. But here is someone who that option had just been excluded to her. And so what was unlocked in terms of her empowerment and her imagination and her self-perception by getting a piece of the action was extraordinary. And over time, it will also be financially beneficial to her. And next. And then finally, the final example I wanted to show you is Pioneer Human Services. This is a nonprofit, probably very much like nonprofits you have here. It deals with its clients, if you will, are individuals who've been homeless, drug addicted, alcohol problems, and so forth. When it began back in 1962, it was essentially 100% grant funded. Went out to local philanthropy, we need money to run this program. Pioneer decided that's not sustainable over the long term. We need to find a way to generate our own revenue. And so they've begun a whole set of businesses, a hotel. They do manufacturing of airplane parts, small manufacturing operation for Boeing, which is based there in Seattle as well. Catering and so forth. The people they hire are the people who were their clients, people who used to be homeless, who had alcohol and drug abuse problems and the like. Today they employ 700 people, $55 million in revenue, and they're over 95% self-funded. And they're an indigenous local nonprofit. Remember, one of the questions is how do you anchor these jobs? Pioneer Human Services is not moving to Phoenix or moving to China. Their reason to be there is because they're Seattleites who want to do something for the people of Seattle. So that's a social enterprise that can really get to some sort of scale and employing many of the kinds of people with the same life history that the Mayor's Commission, Anti-Poverty Commission, is focused on. Next. So I want to move into the Cleveland story and say that one of the aspects of the Cleveland model, if you will, and it may or may not be relevant here, is it draws upon the power of our place-based anchor institutions. Now, where Cleveland's economic energy is really in healthcare, the Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals. It's within the academic institutions like Case Western Reserve University. These are major players economically in our city, and they're rooted in place. They're not going anywhere. They're not moving to China. So what is an anchor institution? It's sticky capital. You know, VCU, or the University of Richmond, I don't know how long they've been here, many, many decades. They're going to be here in 100 years. You could just count on, if there's going to be a Richmond, they're going to be here. So they're in it for the long haul. These anchors are typically among the largest employers in a city. Very often in the top 10 private sector employers in a city, 5 of them will be hospitals or universities, what are called eds and meds. Local economic engines. They have a vested self-interest in the surrounding community. You know, the Cleveland Clinic has Cleveland in its name. If everybody thought Cleveland was just collapsing around it, people are going to go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota for health care rather than to Cleveland if people think that Cleveland's just unsafe. So the institution has a vested interest in having a healthy, safe, vital community. Typically, not always, but typically these anchors are nonprofits, or in cases of universities, they might be state universities. And they're a largely untapped potential. Next. So the types of anchors, universities, hospitals, obviously the local government here, right? And unless the mayor's really taking the whole operation to Florence. So local governments, museums, these tend to be rooted in place. Okay, sports teams sometimes get swapped around, but mostly they're there, you know, in that place. So again, unlike lots of companies that come and go as shareholder value questions say, well, it's better, it's going to make more money if we move to another place, these are anchored, rooted in place. Next. So how big a possibility does this represent? If you take the procurement, not the staff salaries and not the construction budgets, just the purchasing of goods and services to keep the door open, among all the hospitals and universities in the United States, it's over $1 trillion year in, year out, and it's growing. So that's 6% of our gross domestic product. And they're rooted in place. They're not going anywhere. I'll tell you the story of the Cleveland ones in a minute. And their endowments are also very large, close to $800 billion of money that's invested. but very little thought is given in these institutions about how can we invest our money to get a reasonable rate of return so we can keep growing our endowment and pay for our needs, and yet it benefits the community. There are ways to, you can invest in something that's 10,000 miles away, or you can invest locally and get your rate of return and empower and support the local community and the economy. Next. So a lot of what we're doing in Evergreen in Cleveland is around anchor institution procurement. And again, it doesn't need to be linked to anchors. This is the innovation we're trying to drive. So why procure locally? Well, it's good for the institution. You get better vendor servicing. Many people think it's always more expensive. We've not found that to be the case. You can decrease, if you care about environmental sustainability, as many hospitals and universities do, they have very strong greening programs for their institutions. Buying locally cuts out lots of carbon from 1,000 miles of transportation, and so forth. So it can be very good for the institution, very much in their self-interest, but also it benefits the community because you put people to work, you put money into the community, you get the multiplier effect, and so forth. Next. So one example of this in Cleveland is university hospitals, and I did, down there you can see it, a case study with a couple colleagues at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. At the end of this, there'll be a website. You could download these things if you want. And the case study was what one hospital in Cleveland did, and it's our strong partner in the Evergreen Initiative. They were going to spend $1.2 billion in a 5-year period. So this would be like your city doing a major economic development, $1 billion spend. The typical way a hospital like this would spend that money is they would go to one of the very large 5 or 6 national, construction firms, they're great big ones, and say, okay, we've got $1 billion. We want our hospitals and structures sited in these places. Here's our budget. We want it under budget. We may want these green features. And by the way, if you could throw off a couple of the contracts, the smaller contracts to some minority firms locally, that would be great. But it's all up to you. But university hospitals said, we don't want to do it that way. We want to conduct business in another way. We want to get our buildings, we want it on time and under budget, and we want to impact the local economy. This was all happening at the height of the Great Recession. I was there in Cleveland. There was not a crane in the air, nothing being built in Cleveland, Ohio, except through this project. And so what university hospitals did is it set goals for itself voluntarily. And 15% of all the contracts will go to minority-owned firms, 5% to women-owned firms. Very importantly, 80% of all the $1.2 billion spent will be spent with companies that are in Northeast Ohio and owned in Northeast Ohio, not a national chain owned in Chicago that happens to have an outlet in Northeast Ohio. We want to put people to work there. The end result is they blew past their targets. 92% of the $1.2 billion went into the local economy. $1 billion when no money was going into the local economy of Northeast Ohio. More than 5,000 local residents were employed during this period. 110 minority-owned firms that had never been able to break through and do business with large hospital systems because it's very technical. 110 minority-owned firms got contracts as a result. So it's clearly a different way to do business, and as a result of this success, our mayor, Mayor Jackson, has created a community benefits agreement that now many other institutions have signed on to, and private businesses, to set what he calls a new normal. If you're going to do business in Cleveland, if you're going to build something of any scale in Cleveland, whether it's a hospital or a casino or a stadium, there are certain things that are going to be expected of you as the owner of the building in order to benefit the community. And that CBA has just been announced about a month ago, and there's a big press conference where the other hospitals, so forth, signed on. So with that, I want to turn to Evergreen. Next slide, please. So is everybody, you good? Follow me? I'm going to blow through this, and we're going to see I'm going to show you a 6-minute video, and that's how you'll really get what this Evergreen thing's about. So, the Evergreen Cooperative Initiative. We started this in about 2008. The goal was threefold: to create jobs for residents of low-income neighborhoods, to generate wealth for the residents, in other words, not just a living wage job, but some way to also accumulate assets beyond your paycheck, and ultimately to stabilize neighborhoods that, since the riots in the Huff neighborhood back in the late 60s, had been declining for decades. Stabilize them and rebuild them as great places to live. Next. So I mentioned our anchor partners. You can see some of the big institutions. These are big buildings that have recently been built among the hospitals and universities, the VA hospital and so forth. Those institutions annually spend $3 billion on goods and services in just Cleveland, Ohio. $3 billion a year in, year out, circulating through these institutions. And now what I want to show you is the neighborhoods that surround those institutions. Next. So this is a 50-acre site where one of those buildings was the Cleveland Clinic, and that would be right here. And right across the street, that's Chester Avenue, right across the street is this. Cleveland has 3,800 acres of vacant land, and that's not parkland. If we were there 30 years ago, there would be buildings on those 3,800 acres of land. There's a huge amount of land, which is a sign of disinvestment, foreclosure, and the like. Next slide. So we developed these slides back in 2006 and showed them to the leaders of our major institutions in Cleveland. And they're not dummies. They know that there's a lot of distress in the neighborhoods, but they hadn't really understood the full magnitude. So that red circle there is where those big anchor institutions in our city are clustered: the hospitals, the university, VA, the art museum, and the like. That footprint is part of the footprint of our project. There are about 45 or so thousand people living in these neighborhoods surrounding those institutions. So you see all the little squares in green and yellow. Those are vacant properties. They're either owned by the city's land bank or by private individuals. Next slide. So everything in this sort of red, all those little squares, those are buildings. If you go by, the porch is falling in, the roofs collapse. These are buildings that are really distressed. There may be people living in them, and then of course a number of them would be warehouses and so forth. They're just completely vacant. But you can see a lot of distress. Next slide. All these little dots, if you see a little dot, that's not good. So that's where houses have had their water shut off because people can't pay their bills because they don't have jobs. There are houses in tax delinquency because they haven't paid their taxes, or houses in foreclosure. So you put that together on the next slide, and this is the picture. So you see where the institutions are, that's fairly stable, and all around it is this great sea of distress, and yet $3 billion is circulating in that circle. So something is happening where the money is not making it into the neighborhoods, and that's what this project is about. How do you capture and leverage these resources and drive them locally to create businesses and jobs? And I should say the shocking thing about that data there is it was put together in 2006. That predates the foreclosure crisis, which hit Cleveland extremely hard, and it predates the Great Recession. So you can imagine what that might look like now. So next slide. So in Evergreen, we've started 3 companies to date. And let me say, it's the video you're going to see, it's, if you're like anybody else I've met in America, and this sort of prejudices it, but it's a totally inspiring story, right? When you're on the inside of it, it's as difficult as anything else, right? Companies aren't working, and the laundry's not getting delivered on time, and then this happens, and how do you train people, and are we generating enough profit, and the revenue model on solar in Ohio has collapsed, and so all those things happen. Nonetheless, we're still in business and still moving forward. So the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry is an employee-owned company. It does bed linen, towels, and so forth for hospitals and nursing homes and retirement homes and hotels. It employs right now 30-some people. When it's at full capacity, it'll be 50. It's the greenest commercial laundry in Northeast Ohio. It's in a LEED Gold building. We use 1/5 of the water of our competitors and the like. And importantly, it's based right in the neighborhood where we're targeting our hiring. We said, you know, we can't build companies 10 miles away from people because half the people we've hired don't have automobiles, or their licenses have been pulled because they haven't made their child support payments. So we need to put businesses where people are, on bus lines and the like. Evergreen Energy Solutions, we do large-scale solar installations on the roofs of our hospitals and universities. Those are 3 of them. We're about to start our first ground-mounted installation, a 1 megawatt installation, which will be about 5,000 panels on a 5-acre site, generating clean energy for the hospitals and universities in our community. Again, hiring people locally, training them. We're now moving into LED lighting, so people are getting their LED certificates so they can go out and do this, and we're finding our hospitals and universities want to retrofit their everything from their ERs to their parking garages. So big opportunity there. And then Green City Growers, which is our newest business, opened in February of this year. We have with the city's help, we have a 10-acre site in the heart of Cleveland on which we've built a 4-acre structure that is growing 3 million heads of lettuce annually and about 300,000 pounds of herbs, principally basil. And the reason we're doing this is because in Northeast Ohio, virtually all of our leafy greens come from California and Arizona. So we're cutting out 1,500 miles of carbon-based transportation. We're growing the food locally. We get 7 days more shelf life. We're employing people locally and the like. So I think with that, if we could start the videotape, and then we'll go to the goals. So the videotape you're going to see is 6 minutes, I think 6 minutes, 20 seconds. And what you're going to do is meet people in the Evergreen system. And they're going to be workers, residents, the kind of people you're trying to impact here through the Mayor's Poverty Initiative. And it's going to be the leaders of the large anchor institutions in the city. So with that, we'll see this, and then I'll just wrap up, and then we could do questions. Thank you.
And this really is just the beginning, and it's a great model. You know, this is a real deal, and you can see the guys over here and the ladies that are going to own this company, and what an incredible opportunity.
It is really a great day for Cleveland. It's a great day for the employee owners. It's really a great day for all of us working together.
Evergreen changed my life. It changed my life for the best, because if it wasn't for Evergreen and the cooperative op, I don't know where I'd be right now.
Evergreen has changed my life. Has enabled me to be a contributor not only to the community but to society as well.
I love telling them about Evergreen, what Evergreen's done for me, what I've done for Evergreen, and what we've done together, you know.
Traditionally in economic development in this country, what we do is we train people for jobs. And then at the end of that pipeline, there may not be a job there. Evergreen stands that model on its head. We're building the green businesses first. We know what the 50 jobs in them will be, and then we recruit people into those positions.
You know, you help it grow, you nurture it, you are instrumental in what it becomes. And that's the difference between working at Evergreen and somewhere else.
I am an owner versus just a worker. I help make decisions in the company.
You're hired as a probationary or temporary worker for 6 to 12 months. During that time, you prove yourself. Do you show up? Are you a good team player? Do you buy into the Evergreen concept and the mission?
The members who are already a part of the co-op vote democratically on whether or not you get in.
If they vote you in, then you become a member of the co-op. You immediately get a raise. You start buying your share in the co-op, and then each year that there are profits in the company, they're divided into accounts. They're called capital accounts that each worker has, and that's an asset that each worker builds up over time as their earnings.
We have a stake in the business, and we also are part of the decision-making process.
It's putting actual wealth-building material into the hands of people who would normally not have that opportunity. It's making them their own CEO.
Evergreen was really inspired by something that's taking place not in this country but overseas.
What we learned going to Mondragon, Spain, is really how they took a model from over 50 years ago and made it so successful that it's transformed the whole region.
People, the skill sets reside in these areas. We're building it, we're growing them, we're growing the businesses in targeted zones.
The anchor institutions in Greater University Circle do about $3 billion a year in procurement.
The Cleveland Clinic is really very excited about what Evergreen Cooperative Initiative entails. There is so much that is good for the city of Cleveland, and the combination of the area institutions that are here to stay, working with these new cooperatives that are creating not only jobs but wealth for our community.
Everything we do to consume, to run these businesses here, these healthcare operations, if we can do that in a way that's better for the local environment and the community that lives in that environment, that's a real positive for us.
We feed an awful lot of people on campus every day, and we think that the idea of being able to use products that are grown locally very close by, it also has a great environmental benefit of reducing the carbon footprint from the transportation of those goods across long distances. And we think it's good for the community to have that business right here in town.
It's a terrific formula, and we owe it to make sure that we give this every opportunity to work.
But here we are, ready to break ground for our third cooperative, and if that's not a call to celebrate, we don't know what is.
It will turn vacant land into productive use. It will provide good jobs for Clevelanders, and it will provide healthy and affordable locally grown food. As we move ahead and we look at our economy and where it's going, we want to be in the forefront of it. And this project helps us to do that.
Green City Growers is a 3.8 acre greenhouse, hydroponic, leafy greens, will grow lettuces and herbs, and it's in the heart of Cleveland. And it's the third of the Evergreen companies. It will provide employment and build wealth for worker owners.
The future of Evergreen is bright, and maybe we can see more evergreens not only here.
I think what it does is open up the imagination for the country to think about how to do things differently in our urban core.
I see Evergreen having the exact same impact in the future, in that it becomes part of the vocabulary, not just in Greater University Circle.
Leadership. And that leadership has been furnished by the Cleveland Foundation, by the city, and by the leadership of the anchor institutions.
I think that everybody should get into the whole cooperative thing. Maybe in due time, you know, once I get a little older and get more experience into starting the co-op thing, maybe I can start another co-op doing something else in Ohio.
It allowed me to dream again. Things I put on hold and things I just put to the back of my mind and thought not possible again, it's brought that back to the forefront.
Cleveland wants to be where the world is going, not where the world is.
When the Cleveland Foundation began looking at opportunities to really tap into the economic drivers in the city of Cleveland, it was very clear that the University Circle was one of those areas. It's the cultural center of Cleveland, home to the Cleveland Orchestra and many of the city's museums. The University Circle area also boasts three powerhouses in education and healthcare: Case Western Reserve University, University Hospitals, and Cleveland Clinic. Back in 2005, the concept was simple. How do we corral the power of these institutions to help transform the impoverished neighborhoods surrounding them? The Greater University Circle neighborhood. We began looking at the neighborhoods around the campuses of these institutions and saw a unique partnership that can leverage the procurement power and economic engines of these institutions That procurement power, an amazing $3 billion a year. The problem, much of that was leaving the area. Neighborhoods where the average resident earns less than $19,000 a year. Over the next 3 years, we're looking at how can we buy local, hire local, and live local through different strategies working with these anchors.
Well, University Circle is really about collaboration and partnership. With collaboration comes leverage, and the opportunity to leverage the assets that we already have in the circle and around the circle will make this region even more vibrant than it is today.
We understand our workforce comes to the communities, and we want to see the communities that surround us succeed and be great places to live and work. We really believe that investments here pay off over the long term for building this community and this organization.
We have to be engaged with the community in making things happen.
The key for the anchor institutions is we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here no matter what. So it's incumbent upon us to sort of step up the plate and do our fair share to serve as a catalyst.
Checking off two important boxes, hire local and buy local. The Evergreen Cooperatives are worker-owned cooperative businesses housed right in the Greater University Circle neighborhood.
Evergreen is about jobs. It's about wealth building. It's giving people an opportunity. Evergreen is committed to something bigger than all those things, and that's really the transformation of a community.
Evergreen includes an industrial use green laundry that services an increasing number of institutions in the area, and a solar energy business that is transforming the way local companies are being powered.
I am an owner versus just a worker. I help make decisions in the company.
You nurture it. You are instrumental in what it becomes. And that's the difference between working at Evergreen and somewhere else.
The most recent addition, Green City Growers, the nation's largest urban hydroponic greenhouse, is producing produce for area institutions and restaurants.
All of these companies are green companies, whether they're urban agriculture or whether they're using all green laundry detergents and methods, water-saving methods, the solar initiative. Each and every one of these are methods to help us reach this green city goal.
That third box, Live Local, is being met by an innovative program called Greater Circle Living. It incentivizes employees from University Circle institutions to live where they work.
So folks who live in the community or work for a nonprofit can benefit from that, and that attracts people to live within the neighborhoods.
One of the areas attracting a lot of new residents, Uptown.
Which is spectacular because it's residential and retail and restaurants is the missing piece at University Circle. For a contemporary art museum to connect itself to that district makes a lot of sense.
It'll become a district of culture and commerce, which I think is a perfect marriage of what a neighborhood, what a revitalized urban environment can be.
Connecting visitors to the University Circle neighborhood will be much easier thanks to 3 transportation projects, a redesign of a complex main thoroughfare, and 2 new RTA rail stations that will serve as gateways to the neighborhood.
These rail stations in that corridor are more important than ever. It's certainly a major employment hub. It's a very significant destination for tourists and visitors. We transport. We're not the attraction. We try to get people to the attraction and to jobs.
Connecting neighbors to each other and to the area's institutions is another key component of the Greater University Circle initiative.
We have these great partnerships with large institutions to connect them to the people that live in this neighborhood to find ways that they both benefit from the relationship. Folks that live here and people that work here, everyone getting along, deciding what's best for them.
Just by sharing the news of what's going on between neighbors, between folks who live on the same street, in neighboring neighborhoods, are kind of breaking down the barriers.
I think the magic of the Greater University Circle initiative is the broad thinking of the institutions, the neighborhoods, and philanthropy to come together in a way to see the benefits of how it's a win-win for the anchors working together to really leverage our resources in a way that will make a difference for our community.
The term Greater University Circle has now become embedded in Cleveland's future.
If we're going to be successful as a city, we have to do things that will move us into the future. Cleveland is moving where the world is going.
So that's the evergreen story, and I think the last thing I'd say is it resides within, and what gives it a lot of power is it resides within a much bigger initiative to transform those neighborhoods that I was showing you the data on. And that's called the Greater University Circle Initiative that, like your anti-poverty initiative, has a whole transportation focus. It has a school transformation focus because we've got to rebuild and revitalize the schools. It has a lot of other aspects to it, including a really interesting sort of sister project, if you will, to Evergreen called the New Bridge Center for Arts and Technology. Some of you may know the work of in Manchester Bidwell in Pittsburgh, a really interesting model that has been replicated in a number of cities, and we're doing it in Cleveland. And it's a lot of things for kids and giving kids a real opportunity to get into arts and photography and computer design and hip-hop music production, all that. But also we're training adults who live in our neighborhoods as phlebotomists and as medical technicians, and with a commitment from our hospitals to hire them into these jobs, which are very, very good jobs. And I know there's an exploration of such a possibility here in Richmond, which, you know, and I just can't say enough about that in Cleveland. So there are a lot of different moving parts. We've only focused on Evergreen this time, but I hope you've seen that first through Evergreen, but also the other examples I gave you, new approaches to job creation, which are so desperately needed, they really can work. And they can get to some real scale. You know, you talk about 1,300 people working for a community development corporation in Newark. That's pretty serious stuff. And they can last. Some of these institutions, we're new at Evergreen, we're still learning, but some of these models have been from the 60s. So I hope that some of this is at least relevant to the directions you all are taking here. You know, it's humbling to be with you because just a few of the people here I've met and heard stories of, I could be in the audience and you could be up here talking to me about what you're doing. We could take those lessons back to Cleveland. And I hope in the rest of the day I'll learn a lot more about your community and we'll be able to take the good work of Richmond and Mayor Jones and the City Council and your staff back to Cleveland, Ohio. So thank you very much, and I know it's time to conclude, but I'm happy to answer questions also. Thank you. And let me say to the mayor and other people that may have important things to do in their day jobs, if you need to leave, I completely understand. And those that have questions, anyone? Yes?
You mentioned the vacant
property
blocks in Cleveland, and I was there a few years ago. Actually, as a tourist, the hotel gave me a red carpet. A tourist visitor. I remember taking a bus from downtown out to Severance Hall.
Yeah.
And I was just struck. I said, "There's nothing here. It's
right.
vacant." How do we lure retail back? And I asked so that the people living in the adjacent communities see legitimate economic activity. You can drive through areas in Richmond, you go around there, the young people don't see any legitimate activity here.
Yeah. So if anyone in the background here, the question was, when you have such disinvestment and not much going on in neighborhoods, how do you lure retail back? We certainly haven't cracked that code. I can tell you though, one thing we're doing that's starting to pay off, and I think it will lead to retail, is that the hospitals in particular are changing their procurement strategies and saying to vendors, you know, we have a $60 million contract here, you know, for something. And what we want to do, we want to have a bid on it, but the winner is going to be someone who not only comes in at the right price point, but agrees, if you're not in Cleveland, to move into this footprint and open a facility here, manufacturing or developing or doing their work, and hiring people locally. And what started to happen is University Hospitals had recently a $60 million contract. and a company made the commitment to come into the city, hire whatever 50, 60 people, base itself right in Cleveland in the area that was designated. This is part of a strategy that the mayor's working on because the city owns a lot of this land and the hospital. So it's a way to start to get economic activity back in, and we hope then it's going to be a way that the retail and restaurants and so forth starting to see that there's more economic activity will move into the neighborhoods. Same with grocery stores. We have the same food desert situations that you have here. And it started to work. In one of these neighborhoods, that big area that I showed you of vacant land, that's actually starting to get redeveloped. The Cleveland Clinic's involved in it, and there was just a story in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, our daily newspaper, that a grocery store is moving in. That's the first one in probably 30 years that's moved into that neighborhood since they all left. Yes. Back there and then here.
I really am very pleased with the information concerning reinvestment of the dollars for the persons that live in the communities that is affected. And what I'm interested also to know is, do you have any information on a benchmark timeline of what it took to motivate people to be involved in their own community transformation? From the standpoint, I live in public housing.
Yep.
So, and I talk to my neighbors a lot, and sometimes it's just interested information, whether it's good for them or not. So I'm interested in what informed your policy process to really re-engage people that live in the community where it would be a benefit for them.
Yep. So let's see. So there are a couple ways to answer that. First, when we opened the Evergreen Laundry, which is open, it's based in a neighborhood called Glenville, and it's a very poor neighborhood, and there are nice parts of it. I live in Glenville. It's near the hospitals and so forth. When we opened that laundry in October of 2009, we didn't have many customers. So, but we built this facility, and people kept coming up in the neighborhood. What is it? Because it was the first time anything had happened in that area. And we started with 5 people, and within a month, we had 500 applications for jobs, because people, for one, people are desperate for work, and 2, it was the only place you could apply. So I do think doing projects like, citing a business in a community, it not only is good for the people it hires, but it's a kind of beacon of hope that, that something is starting to happen. So that's one, where you're trying to create a new sort of vision and energy just by the fact that the central neighborhood, where the median household income is about $13,000, it's really one of the poorest. It now is the site of this greenhouse, which is the largest urban food production greenhouse in America. And in order to put it there, we did all kinds of public meetings of people. We told them, here's what's coming. There was another hydroponic greenhouse somewhere. We did bus tours where residents who were interested in maybe getting jobs, we took them to see the hydroponics, to see how this whole thing worked. We worked with the local community development corporation to have these discussions and so forth. There is another part of the Greater University Circle, and it's called Neighborhood Connections. So if you just Google for Cleveland Neighborhood Connections, you'll see this project, which is affiliated with the Cleveland Foundation, and its focus now is in these neighborhoods. Every year it gives small grants. It gives about 5,000 small grants. Some of them are $50, some are $200, and it's doing convenings and dialogues in people's neighborhoods and in their living rooms all over the city to talk about what do we want this neighborhood to become, what are our hopes and aspirations, and also just to meet their neighbors. Some people said, I've lived in this neighborhood 20 years and I've now met 6 new people. So we're trying a lot of different things like that to generate hope and unleash energy, hopefully. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry.
Was there a question?
Yeah, why don't you?
Well, you reference we a lot, and
Who's
so
we?
Yeah, who's we? Can you tell us about all the different groups that are involved? I know you
Yeah.
got universities. Can you just bring us the big picture?
So there are a lot of groups without whom this would not have developed to this point. One is local philanthropy. Our community foundation, Cleveland Foundation, the oldest in the country, it's been absolutely essential because it put its reputation, it put some of its money, a good amount of its money, and it puts senior staff on the line and say, we're going to try to catalyze this and incubate it. And then also other local philanthropy has participated, but the Cleveland Foundation overwhelmingly. The city of Cleveland, Mayor Jackson and the Director of Economic Development for the city, Tracy Nichols is her name, excuse me, they've been essential. It was through their efforts we were able to get the land for the greenhouse. It was through their efforts that we were able to get access to what are called HUD 108 loans, which are 20-year patient money at a couple % interest, so very good money. Through their work with us, we were able to get access to New Markets tax credits through the banks and so forth. So financing through them has been very important. The anchor institutions as customers of these businesses, very important, but also because they've helped us with expertise. They actually helped us in how to build this laundry because they know something about laundry. And they help us as investors. We've set up a fund called the Evergreen Cooperative Development Fund, and the anchor institutions have put money into it. So those are the most important actors. And then, you know, we have worked with a group called Towards Employment, which is an intermediary that helps get people who are job ready who may have been, you know, ex-felons and so forth. The Community Development Corporation. So there are a lot of players, but the really core of it has been the city, local philanthropy, and the anchor institutions. Now there actually is a formal structure that's been set up, now that we've gotten enough going. And there's a board, as I said, of something called the Evergreen Cooperative Corporation, which has representation from the Evergreen companies, the funders, the philanthropy, the anchor institutions, and the local business community, and the mayor's also appoints one seat onto this board. And so now the we is really this formal incorporated structure, but it began much more sort of ad hoc, some people trying to do something new.
Thank you.
Over there and then there.
Yeah, I think you answered part of my initial question, which was where was the outlay capital that you needed, because if you're just going to build a building and start a business, you need to have resources, and I think you answered that with Community Foundation and other philanthropy. My next idea, however, was how did you go down the procurement path? Because when you're talking about public universities and when you're talking about local governments, you do have procurement laws. Was there sheltered market programs or other things in place that enabled you to do what you were hoping to do? Because I think so often we find ourselves having to justify sole source because we're trying to go down the social enterprise path. And what did that look like, and was that already in place, or did you have to do lobbying for legislation? And then finally, seeing some of what you've got, I think Richmond is seeing a little bit of this kind of bubble up from the ground up. Our nonprofits are doing social enterprises to try and grow their revenue stream and make that kind of an impact. And I know here in the city we're working on some other initiatives very similar. But how do you then identify who's working and bring them together and then put them under one umbrella of this kind of cooperative? And then finally, I'll just commend you for putting the ownership part into play and giving decision making to the employees. I think ESOPs are wonderful entities, and it really does give people that sense of investment.
Yep, yep. So you're a man of many questions. So let me say the financing, as you could tell from those pictures and from the video, these are not little, cheap companies. And that was part of our strategy. You don't need the wages co-op that I showed you the slide of, the 100-some women who are owners of their company, and it's very successful, and they're making a profit and a living wage and health benefits. It's some thousands of dollars to, what do you need? You need some vehicles, and you need some mops, and they've got an office, but that's a very low cost approach, which is fabulous, and the more of that, the better. Ours was very capital intensive, and the reason we did that is we felt that in order to really capture the imagination of these large multi-billion-dollar institutions, we couldn't just go to them and say, we want to start a snow removal company of 5 people. It's just not, doesn't register with them. They're so big. You know, we needed to say, we want to take over the supply of all of your leafy greens and grow them right here in Cleveland. You know, at that scale, they could kind of get that. So these are expensive companies. That laundry was a $5.7 million capital raise. Now, bear in mind, we raised that at the time Lehman Brothers collapsed and credit squeezed up everywhere. And the way we were able to do that is about $1 million of that, or $750,000 of that, was from the Cleveland Foundation, where they put the grant money into a fund, and then we turned the grant money into a 1% loan. So it's really cheap money that ultimately, God pray it all works, ultimately has to be repaid back to the fund and then revolved out to start another business. $1.5 million of it was this HUD 108 money. That's, you know, all needs to be repaid back. So it's all debt, but it comes from the city government, from the feds down. There's a big new markets tax credit allocation there. We worked with US Bank to get this tax credit allocation. There's another smaller revolving loan fund in Ohio. One bank participated. So the capital stack is, you know, many different areas. But the philanthropic dollars are essential because it's the first money in, it's the cheapest money, and having a patron like the Cleveland Foundation, which is a major player in the city, saying we're standing behind this, makes other people feel better. Because let's face it, it's hard to get money for any startup, right? I mean, banks generally don't want to loan to them. And then you say, you know, we're going to cite these businesses in some of the most disinvested, low-income neighborhoods in the city. And then most of the people we're going to hire are probably going to be ex-offenders. And we're going to try to be the greenest companies in our class, and we're going to be cooperatives. You know, the banker sort of looks at you like, really? So you need the backing of those sorts of institutions. We're very fortunate in Cleveland because our major partners, this is about procurement, are all private institutions. So Cleveland Clinic could do whatever it wants. It has $6 billion of revenue every year, and it can spend its money however it wants. Now, it's still a challenge because we're asking procurement officers to think in a new way, not just for the least possible cost, even if the thing comes from 1,000 miles away, but how do you do full cost accounting to make sure you benefit the community? Our research director, Steve Dubb, raise your hand, Steve here, we won't go into it, but Steve could tell you about public institutions, if you want to stay after, that have changed their procurement strategies to get around some of the issues you talked about. But in Cleveland, we really haven't faced that. And the ownership piece, let me say, you know, working in a cooperative or employee-owned system is a challenge. I'm very committed to it. I think, you know, if you look at the academic studies of, and someone in this room has done one of these, if you look at the academic studies about employee-owned businesses and compare them to more traditionally owned businesses in the same sector, what you find is not only, you find that the employee-owned companies are generally more productive, that the build-up of assets or individual wealth in the company is significantly higher by a couple orders of magnitude, as opposed to a 401k, what your equity ownership is in the company. So they have a lot of virtues to them. But creating that culture of ownership is a big challenge, and that's the key. And so in Evergreen, we've invested in building a very robust training program. Because, you know, it's a tricky thing for anybody, and then especially for someone who may not have been in the workplace for a long time, to say to you, you're an owner of a company, you know, that brings about a whole, so does that mean when I'm folding sheets and I'm the owner and I decide I don't want to fold sheets, I can just walk away? You know, so when you're wearing your worker hat and your owner hat and all that. And these companies are not collectives. It's not that everybody's making every decision. They have boards of directors, they have a CEO who's hired and reports. there's supervisors, and there's a workforce. And there are a few decisions initially that the worker owners get to make, and hopefully that'll grow over time. Yes, sir.
You partially answered this, but I was curious as to what percentage of the foundation's investments in these enterprises are in the form of program-related investments versus straight unrestricted grants.
So the question was, how much of the philanthropic money is either just grants or what are called PRIs, or even mission-related investments. So PRIs are, in effect, grant money that's loaned out that needs to be repaid back, and it's loaned at a very preferential rate. And it's consistent with the mission of the institution. Mission-related investing, or MRIs, is another step forward, taking the actual endowment of the institution and investing it locally, or investing it in some kind of asset class consistent with your mission. Essentially, all the money that's gone into Evergreen has been grant money, pure grant money. The Cleveland Foundation does, in the broader Greater University Circle initiative I discussed with the transportation and these other elements, has put program-related investments in. Some of their biggest, some of them are a couple $1 million. So they're major investments in retail development and real estate development and so forth. The Cleveland Foundation's not yet doing mission-related investment. There are only a handful of foundations in the country that have moved in that direction. But hopefully it will move, because there is some argument that could be made, and I don't say that about any local philanthropy, but that you might have a foundation that's giving $30 million a year to projects that are, to help the environment. But your, $800 million of endowment investments, which are completely separated from the program-related side, could be generating even more than $30 million of negative environmental externalities, depending on what you're investing in. So there's this movement in philanthropy to harmonize all of the financial resources to be mission-related and mission-focused. That's a whole other question. Yes, sir.
So how do you define profitability? Is it in the traditional economic way, or is it much more holistic with this type of program?
Well, profitability is really, let's see. I mean, these companies they're really triple bottom line companies, right? So they need to make a profit, and if we don't make a profit, we're going out of business. So these are not intended to be subsidized forever. They're intended to stand on their own. So being in the black and generating revenue, and generating enough revenue that you're not only paying people, but you're creating excess resources that could then be allocated to the workers as part of their ownership. That's absolutely critical. But we're also, we have environmental metrics we look at, we have community metrics. But yeah, at the bottom, the companies aren't only about profit, but without the profit, the whole thing goes away. And that's, I'm not a business person. I used to work a long time ago in the U.S. Senate. I've worked in international development with the UN agencies and NGOs, worked in the community kinds of stuff. So I'm not a business person. And, you get a lot of respect for, if you're going to make your payroll and you're actually going to not get subsidized, you need to be washing enough sheets. And it's about something more than that. And indeed, it's about more than the individual company's success. What we're trying to create is a culture that our success is judged twofold, primarily twofold. One, are our companies working? Are they creating profit? Are they doing what they should do? But two, are we doing this in a way that's creating more opportunity for others, our brothers and sisters in the community who aren't yet fortunate enough to have these jobs, for them to be able to get jobs also? So this is really about transforming the community overall. Yes, sir.
Just had a question relating to the transformation of the community. It appears from the map there's a lot of opportunity to rebuild and provide some affordable housing and mix-up housing. So who's addressing that part of the rebuilding?
Well, that's really part of this broader Greater University Circle initiative. There are a couple things going on. First, there's an employer-assisted housing program with the anchor institutions, which provides workers forgivable loans for their mortgage down payments if they stay in the houses for 5 years. So the strategy is to take every day in that red circle, over 50,000 people come to work in those institutions. And only about 3,500 live in Cleveland. They're all living in the suburbs. So the strategy is to provide incentives to have them move in and renovate houses, rebuild houses, whatever. And that's starting to work, so we get income diversity. So that's one. Evergreen itself has a housing program whereby, because what we want to do is build wealth, we realized that the company could stand behind loans, and it's working with the Cleveland Housing Network. They have houses in our network, in our community. The workers in the companies put in some sweat equity to improve those houses, and then they can buy them. And these are low-income houses, but that have been redone, that are nice and in decent neighborhoods. And you buy it through payroll deduction, and the workers can own their house outright in 4 to 5 years. So that's part of it. And then there are community development corporations. They're just doing a lot of renovation and rehab. And the city has a program of demolition, is taking down several hundred houses. They've been stripped of all their copper and everything every year. So there's a lot of activity in rebuilding and housing right now.
Interested in the rate of return for original residents that are in those distressed communities. One-for-one replacement being the primary focus for me, but also knowing when you're doing your redevelopment, how many of the original residents is the goal for return, and no pre-qualification to return.
Yeah. We don't have a goal for that. We're in a very different situation than you all. I was told last night that Richmond is gaining population. In the last census between 2000 and 2010, Cleveland lost 17% of its population. And we're still leaking population. So, our effort is designed to provide jobs for folks who live in the neighborhoods now, to keep them there so that there's an opportunity for them, either through Evergreen or through training with this Center for Arts and Technology, so they can move into jobs at the local hospitals and so forth, and then to encourage employees of the anchor institutions to come into the city. Some of them may have lived in those neighborhoods before and coming back, but we don't have, I understand what you're pointing to, but we don't, at this time at least, have goals for that. One thing we are very concerned about, I suspect we're wrapping up because this guy, we're like bookends. Thad and I go way back. We are very concerned that we not do something in Cleveland that has been done time and time again in economic development strategies, which is you take a place where people have been hurting for a long time because jobs have gone away, disinvestment, crime, drugs, all of that, and then you pump a lot of juice into the neighborhoods by investment of this kind, and then what happens is the market takes off. Rents go up, real estate prices go up, and the population gets blown apart, and what you do is you get neighborhoods that used to be all people of color, and now they're all young hipsters, whatever. And that's a big problem. I used to live in Washington, D.C. for 30 years. I go to neighborhoods, I cannot believe it. They do not look anything like they used to. We were talking about 14th and U in Washington, D.C. It does not look like the 14th and U I remember from the late 60s. So that's a big part of what we're grappling with. And part of the answer for that is land trusts and other kinds of mechanisms to stabilize the local market so you can get diversity of income and of race, but you can preserve the historic populations that have been there. But that's a big other question. That.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Howard. So, as Ted alluded, he knows some stories about me that I would not want told. So as co-chair of the Maggie Walker Initiative, I want to, on behalf of Ms. Robertson and Dr. Meeser, thank you so much for coming and sharing this expertise. Thank you, Mayor Jones, for being here, and for our council members, especially our inquisitive ones with the great questions. I want to just say a couple of comments on what the follow-through is going to be on this for those who are not directly involved. First of all, this afternoon there's an encore presentation. Ted is speaking at 5:30 at University of Richmond downtown, 626 East Broad Street, to the Citizens Advisory Board of the Walker Initiative, which is the citizens group, 1/2 persons in poverty, and who will have input on these policy proposals. So if you have friends or colleagues who would be interested, by all means call them up, have them come down at 5:30, that there will be space. You can come back yourself again if you want to see the same thing twice. But secondly, there is an economic development task force group that has as one of their items looking at developing a social enterprise strategy. And just to reassure you, this is not the whole anti-poverty initiative. This is one piece, just as in Cleveland. And it has to be integrated with many other things. And it's focused, the economic development group is focused on some immediate short-term things, short-term wins that we need to have, but this is a longer-term process. And we do have some people on the task force who are devoted specifically to that. But the third thing is, if any of you in the audience, if this really caught your imagination and you want to get to work and help out, please let us know, because we need as many hands as possible to make this happen. And I think this is very inspiring. I'm grateful for the video, because it really got to the human element of what it means to change a sense of possibility in somebody's life, and that's really what this is all about. And also a sense of possibility of what our community can be. And I think that this beautifully helped illustrate what the next Richmond could look like. So thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.